And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C show right here on Fox Sports Radio, WMML. Glad you guys could join us. And speaking of joining us, don't forget, you got to join us on Facebook. You know, join the Facebook group, Talking Boxing with Billy C, or friend me, Bill Calogero. Hey, you like Twitter? Why don't you follow us on Twitter? It's at Talkin' Boxing. Let me spell it for you, okay? It's TalkinBoxing. And while you're at it, check out the website, www.billycboxing.com. Well, it's time for the
Blast from the Past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Shadow, top-ranking heavyweight. Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Upset by Mr. Khan must be the greatest.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time.
Look at that left hook. Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
Today's Blast from the Past is being sponsored by the International Boxing Organization, where their computerized ranking system is second to none. If you don't believe me, check it out, www.iboboxing.com. And this week, we're going to be talking about former world middleweight and super middleweight champion Michael Second to Nunn. And joining me to tell us all about Michael Nunn is my man, Alex Pierpaoli. What's up, brother?
Good evening, Billy C. How's it going?
Not too bad, not too bad. So I guess I'm going to snitch on you a little bit. You know, when I first reached out to Alex about Michael Nunn, he's like, "Really, Michael Nunn?" You know, and I'm saying to myself,
I was like, wow.
Yeah, well, you know what? The funny thing was, I read the email and I went, "Am I confusing him with someone else?" You know, I'm like, "Well, let me see." You know, and I went, "Well, you know, maybe Alex is right." You know, and then I started looking at stuff and I'm like, "Wait a minute, I think Alex might be confusing him with somebody." And I'm glad we decided to do it, because Michael Nunn, I'm shocked that a guy who fought so recently ago is virtually forgotten, you know. And well, there's some reasons for that. Tell us about Michael Nunn.
Well, I tell you something, and I, you're absolutely right. My reaction, I think, was wrong, because you know, we are fans too, and that was my fan first reaction, because when I got into the sport, I was not a fan of Michael Nunn's, and I was rooting very hard for James Toney and for Iran Barkley when he fought them. I didn't particularly care for his style at all at that time, but now, preparing for this blast, I watched several of his fights, and I could appreciate quite a bit what he was a stylist, and I didn't like stylists. I couldn't appreciate what they did when I was a younger fan, but I can now. But yeah, Michael Second to Nunn, his full name is Nunn. He was born April 14th in 1963. I actually thought I saw that he was born in Mississippi, but I've also got Davenport, Iowa, so not sure about that. He moved to Davenport, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi, when he was young, when he was about 12, and it was right around then that he started boxing. He's 6'3" and fought at middleweight and super middleweight. But he was in trouble a bit, you know, street fights and shoplifting type stuff when he was a kid. At 12, he got into boxing to try to, you know, get him out of some causing fights in the street and, you know, generate, you know, sort of direct that into the ring as an amateur. And, of course, he became extraordinarily successful as an amateur. He was 168-8. He lost, for a while they thought of him as the best. He actually considered himself, he sort of said this jokingly about himself, that he was the best two-round fighter in the world, because I guess he had a tendency to tire late, and, you know, they were only three-round fights, and he did lose to Virgil Hill in the '84 Olympic trials, and that's why he was not part of that amateur class, just like Mike Tyson, who lost to Henry Tillman. These were Nunn and Mike Tyson. That's a good trivia question. What world champions, you know, were lost in that '84 Olympic trials, and that's a good, you know, Michael Nunn and Mike Tyson were two of them.
Yeah, you know, that's something I totally forgot about it, and actually I don't follow the amateurs the way I probably should, and I got to be honest, and people can probably take this wrong, but I don't think of Davenport, Iowa, as such a badass city the way Michael Nunn, I mean, and everybody around him that knows him, and I don't know if you caught that well, we'll get to where he is today, but that interview, and they were all saying how rough it was, the streets and this and that, and I'm like, Davenport, Iowa? I'm thinking like this cornfields. What do they do? Push over cows and stuff like that, I mean, I just was shocked to hear how bad it is, but I guess it is.
Yeah, evidently Davenport, Davenport itself is a big city, right? It's a coastal city there on the river, and it does have its share of rough sections. The east side of Davenport, evidently, East 6th Street was a specifically difficult neighborhood. There's a clip on YouTube of him on the Arsenio Hall show. It must be from, it's right before, like maybe a month before the Iran-Barkley fight. And he mentions that he says when he was growing up, they always called him Wonder Mike, because they were wondering what he would get into next.
And it's funny when you start looking at who he's fought and beat, and then I'm saying to myself, Alex doesn't want to do it. He doesn't think this guy is worthy of it. I mean, right off the bat, he knocks out and he wins most of his fights by knockout. Frank Tate, Roldan, Juan Domingo Roldan, who's a nemesis for
I remember rooting for both of those guys. That's why I really didn't care for him. But like I said, watching him now, that win over Roldan, that's a good fight.
I know.
I mean, his style. He kept his hands down. He was definitely more of a stylist. So quick. But he did have power, and he didn't have it until they did. I guess Gil Clancy was one of the ones who said to the Goosen, "You got to work on this guy's power. He's just otherwise he's not going to be that fun to watch." And sure enough, they did. He got the Tate knockout, and then he has the one-punch knockout over Sambu Kalambai,
which is no easy feat. With
right.
Kalambai. And he beat Barkley and our guy Starling. I mean, he had some really good wins, and as far as you mentioned the Goosen brothers, he was their first big name on Goosen Tudor, man. I mean, Michael Nunn was their first big guy. He kind of thinks that he made them as much as they made him.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it. They were both. I mean, he was their first champion, or at least I'm
first marquee guy.
If not the first champion, he was definitely. You're right, the marquee one. And that was one of the things that was unfortunate. And they talk about this a little in that Arsenio Hall clip, which I will post in the social media for the show. He was avoided because right at that time, of course, this is 1989, 1990. Hearns, Leonard, Duran were still lurking around, trying to just get one or two big fights and then call it quits. Leonard and Duran were about to meet again when Nunn and Barkley were on Arsenio Hall, and Ray Leonard didn't want any part of him. And Ray Leonard was even quoted as saying that the best middleweight in the world right now is Michael, second to none. And that was one of the things that Arsenio Hall asks him is, do you think it's just an issue of your youth that they're avoiding? And Michael Nunn says that. He said, I don't think it's an issue of them being scared of me. I think it's like you said, Arsenio, they're avoiding my youth. So, that kind of thing, I guess, that does happen.
Yeah, and like we said, we kind of jumped the gun. We mentioned some of the big names that he fought. He did have a couple of blemishes on his record, but interesting, people still talk about James Toney because he's still active in somewhat of a degree today as a heavyweight, but he lost to James Toney for a middleweight world title way back. And this is amazing to think when you're thinking about James Toney in 1991. And it was his only stoppage, and this is when Jackie Callan was with James Toney, and a lot of Michael Nunn's fights were televised, and you would have thought that this guy would have made a ton of money. But I guess from what we find out is that's not so true. You know, he didn't make the money, or at least didn't hold on to it the way you would have thought.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would have been nice, I think, especially for his long-term success. I think if he was able to get nail down a fight with a Hearns or a Leonard, but he didn't quite. The timing wasn't right. He was too good. I mean, he was a big middleweight, and because of his dimensions, and he was incredibly elusive. He was a southpaw. That's one of the things about that Sambu Kalambe knockout is that it's not that, because Kalambe had a pretty decent chin.
Right.
It's the punch, he didn't see it coming at all. It was so quick and comes from a southpaw angle. He didn't see it, and good night. So, I mean, that's one of those things to think about, in terms of the inherent risk of a southpaw, especially a speedy southpaw, is that, and imagine one who could hit hard. Imagine how risky and dangerous a fight with one of those guys would be. But I think if you watch, and I will post clips of this, those early, I mean, because this is a sign of a great fighter. He could brawl when he had to. He could stand there and slug when he had to. And against a guy like Iran Barkley, Barkley is going to come at you and try to make it a brawl. Well, Nunn slugs with him. The first round of Barkley versus Nunn is a really good round. They really trade. So the idea that, because that was my knock on him back then when I was a teen watching him, was that I thought he spent too much time on his bike, sort of using his legs and with his hands down and just being defensive. But he can be quite offensive when he wants to be and do damage with his punches.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned Sugar Ray Leonard, but Roy Jones Jr. was the guy that they were really trying to make that fight, and Michael Nunn wanted to fight. Team Goosen wanted to fight, and even Roy Jones Jr.'s team wanted that fight. All the networks wanted to fight, but the problem was that Roy Jones was supposed to get, from what I heard, $3 million, and they offered Michael Nunn $125,000, and that is what kind of killed the fight, and then they never opened up negotiations again, which you can't really blame Michael Nunn. And then you have to look at yourself and say, if Roy Jones was making that kind of money back then, why is he so broke now?
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, and that was one of the things that I think that, and this I think speaks to his downfall, or at least begins to. There's an article, July 6, 2008 article by Sean Keeler in the Des Moines Register, The Rise and Fall of Boxing Champion Michael Nunn. And in that, he does sort of say that, he takes responsibility for the situation he's in now. And both the writer of the article and his cousin, Marshall Jackson, who was the one who got him into boxing, seem to point to, getting rid of the Goosens before that James Toney fight. He made that decision rather than, because I guess there was a contract question at that point, and rather than continue with the Goosens, he went off on his own, went back to Davenport, where a lot of friends and family said, do this, come with us, and that's where he fought. He had Angelo Dundee actually in his corner against James Toney, but it didn't matter. That was his first loss, and it never really put things back together completely after that. And you wonder if that making those decisions about going back home to Davenport and picking up some of those old associations are what ended up getting him back involved with drugs, and that's eventually what led to an arrest, and that's where he is now, is in a federal corrections facility.
I see a lot of similarities with him, not so much style or anything, but circumstance. A parallel with Kelly Pavlik, because Kelly Pavlik refused to leave Youngstown, Ohio. Boom Boom Mancini was from the same area. As soon as he made a few bucks, he got the hell out of Youngstown. And even Michael Nunn to this day. Now, I don't know if you caught the interview by Ray Kilgore. It was an interview that was, I don't know if there's been any since, but it was the first interview with him when he was in jail. And he says one of those things. Michael Nunn says, most people try their hardest to get out of Davenport. And, people felt that his biggest mistake was that he never could. He would go back and just like you say, get involved with the same types of people that would lead him astray. And let's talk about his trouble, because that's an important part of Michael Nunn. In 2002, which was his last professional fight, he fought Vincent Durham, and in Connecticut, actually, in Bridgeport, and he won a 10-round decision. Now, this isn't a guy that started fading and all of this stuff. I mean, he won his last 6-7 fights in a row, and after he had lost. When his bid for a world light heavyweight title, and including one of those fights on his way up when he moved up in weight to super middleweight was John Iceman Scully he beat. But after the Vincent Durham fight, which took place in January of 2002, in August of that same year, this guy was set up, which I can't stand when people get set up, because it's almost like, there should be a fine line there. I mean, when an undercover cop is the guy selling you the drugs, and apparently,
and it seems so screwy. Did you see what supposedly he tried to buy it for $200? Come on.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing.
Weird.
At the time, it had a street value of something like $25,000 or something like that, and he bought it was a kilo. So yeah. So he gets set up by an undercover cop. He gets busted in 2002, August of 2002. Couldn't fight, and by the time he gets convicted, he gets sentenced to 24 years based on some of his previous arrests, and he went away in 2004. He's 53. He's going to be 52 years old this year, and from what I understand, he's still behind bars.
Yes, he is, and he will be for. I don't know when he's eligible for parole, but like you said, it was a 24-year sentence. He has been. It seems that he's been a model inmate, and it's been where he is has the level of security has come down, so that he's at seems like he's at a nicer facility now than he was, like for more of a minimum security place. But just to illustrate that idea that James Toney loss, and then making that switch back to the Davenport crowd, from between 1983 and 2002, he had been arrested 28 times. Well, 25 of them came after the James Toney fight. So that tells you right there that something changed dramatically. But yeah, it does seem like it was 2.2 pounds of cocaine, so it's a whole kilo. Now, I don't know, to me that seems very odd that evidently he had made some agreement with the undercover guy that he was going to, pay for it, like he took it in advance. But I don't know, the other article I see is from a USA Today that says he tried to buy the cocaine with $200, which to me that seems, kind of shady. And then, they threw the book at him. So it does make you question the idea of a 24-year sentence for a nonviolent crime. And one of the things that USA Today article says is the prosecutors even said that because of his long history in drug trafficking offenses, there was a likelihood that he had used a firearm at some point. Well, how is that punishable? I don't know. To me, that sounded a little shady as well.
Yeah, it's railroad. Listen, man, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that somebody that's selling drugs, especially a drug like that, shouldn't be reprimanded. But when you read about somebody who basically is caught blowing somebody's head off, and they get 20 years and they're out on parole in less than 7, and this guy gets sentenced to over 24, and it's 10 years go by. He's been in jail for 10 years, more than 10 years, and he's not even up for parole yet, and he's a model prisoner. I mean, something just doesn't seem right. You know, I mean, it just now, like again, it's like what you're saying. You know, he had so many other convictions that they all caught up with him. But you know, I know that they want to set an example, especially with a name like Michael Nunn. But it's a shame, and you know, that's an unfortunate case because this guy was a very talented fighter, and when you look at the names that he beat, I mean, we mentioned Frank Tate and Callum Bay and Barkley and Starling. How about Donald Curry? You know, he beat Donald Curry. You know, Victor Cordoba twice. He beat him. William Guthrie was a good fighter at the time. You know, he won the Ring Magazine A award in Ring Magazine. It was the Progress of the Year award. I never even heard that. But the KO Magazine, he got Fighter of the Year in '88. You know, so I mean, you know, this guy was the real deal. And some of the other things I found pretty interesting about him was, you know, he was so popular and he was, you know, regarded by big name people. Like his bodyguard was Mr. T. You know, it was one of his bodyguards, and he was good friends with Gene Hackman. And I know you're not a big football fan, but you know, I like the 49ers, and Roger Craig was a good running back, a really good running back during the day back in the Montana days, and he was related to him. It was his brother-in-law, you know. So I mean, this is a guy that a lot of people, including our guy Bert Sugar, was actually comparing him to Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yeah, he definitely. I mean, the Michael Nunn of 1988 to 1991, you know, is a contender there with some of the all-time great middleweights. I mean, go ahead, look at the footage on YouTube. He's very quick. He's very hard to hit. He has this very naturalistic style in his ability to get out of the way of punches. He's able to, you know, corner a guy and switch angles on him, and that's one of the ways that I think he was able to start increasing his power, is that he could follow up when he had you hurt because of how he could close the angles and stuff. So, yeah, in terms of skill, he definitely had a point where he was one of the best in the world. And that's one of the things that this, again, Bill, like we've talked about, this era, I think, is interesting, and there's a little bit of a problem here, or maybe not a problem, but an issue with the International Boxing Hall of Fame, or what do we do with these guys? Because I think, you know, Michael Nunn comes in contact with a couple guys that we've talked about, Marlon Starling, Iran Barkley, Donald Curry, James Toney. They're all guys. Are these guys going to get into the Hall of Fame? Some of them have not been on the ballot yet. And perhaps, I hope it's not because of political reasons, you know, the fact that he's in prison, but I certainly think that is part of it.
Yeah, and I don't like it. I don't like that, you know, and don't get me wrong, I forget how you felt, but I thought that Gotti deserved to get in to the Hall of Fame, not for any other reason other than the impact he made on the sport. I think that has to be a contributing factor along with the accomplishments. And a guy like Michael Nunn, to be honest with you, after I decided to pick him, I was surprised that he wasn't in. I thought he already was in. You know, I think for a little bit I confused him with Terry Norris. You know, because they kind of fought around the same time and they did have similar style. Terry Norris was a little more exciting, but Michael Nunn was a good fight. Can we use the word great? I mean, maybe we should. You know, because
well, I think that's the thing that would be interesting, because if Nunn gets in, then, you know, okay, well, then we have a Hall of Famer here. This Hall of Famer beat Starling, so now we have sort of a yardstick of Starling was defeated by a Hall of Famer in trying to move up. Donald Curry, same deal. You know, we don't know. There's question marks about all those guys, and I think it's sort of unfair to that era in a way.
Well, you know, when we talked to Marlon feels he was robbed in this fight, and it was one of those really close, could have went either way decisions. It was a majority decision win, similar to
it's a hard fight to watch, though, because their styles did not mesh well.
No.
Nunn's style meshed well with guys like Barkley and Toney. Those fights are quite watchable.
And
when
Tate,
I was young,
and Frank,
though, I didn't
Frank
like
Tate.
them because I was so rooting so hard for the other guy. It made me mad when Nunn frustrated him.
Well, I tell you, when you watch Barkley and how big and strong he was, and then to realize that Michael Nunn beat him, regardless of the close scores, you got to give him credit. I mean, and then now when you look, see, I think they put too much emphasis on the record at the end. When you look at when you look at Barkley, a lot of his losses all came at the end of his career when maybe he shouldn't have even been fighting, and I think that kind of clouds his accomplishment as a fighter. I'm talking about. And then you look at a guy like Michael Nunn who beat him, so I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough. It's tough to know what exactly to do with these guys. But
and you know what else, Alex? I don't mean to cut you off, but here's a guy that was a world champion basically from 1988 all the way. If you combine the middleweight run and the super middleweight run, basically he was holding a belt all the way up until he lost it to 1994. So you're talking about from 1988 up to 1994 as a world champion. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think back to that time, I think in part because you had Hagler had just exited in 1987, and this was right when I think the IBF was starting out. Didn't the IBF start out in like 85, 86, something around there? So these guys were sort of the alternative middleweight champion, because Ray Leonard had moved up to fight Donnie Lalonde and sort of left the middleweight division in sort of disarray. So I think that was another thing that hurt Michael Nunn, is that he didn't have the style following a guy like Hagler to immediately engender the same fans, and because if fans of Sugar Ray Leonard, well, Sugar Ray Leonard was still there, so they didn't go to Michael Nunn either.
Well,
so it was just, that's the thing about boxing. Sometimes it's all timing,
and it's always the generation before. So an example, in the 80s, and I said this earlier, I wouldn't have thought that if you asked me if it was the last great era. And then when Hagler left and like you said, Sugar Ray Leonard, he started messing up the division a little bit. That whole Donnie Lalonde thing really set the wheels in motion for what we have today. And during that time, people saying boxing's dead, it's nothing like it. In the 90s and all through the 90s. And now we're in 2015, and we're referring to a guy like Michael Nunn as being so good. And he was in that era when we weren't even looking at him as good when he was fighting. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's why I always like to wait for a fighter to end his career. You got to digest his career, let it sit for a little bit, and then evaluate him. Because if you evaluate him too soon, you may give him too much credit or not enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're definitely right, and I think the I put them in with the computer, and I think the computer sort of reflects what we're saying this time, and it's pretty cool because it does sort of say, remember this era because there was some value to it. But I put Michael Nunn in first against Miguel Cotto, who of course is undisputed middleweight champion, and the first time they fought, Michael Nunn came out on top, unanimous decision. He had dropped Cotto once in the 8th, 3 scores of 119 to 108. Then I had them fight 100 times, and Nunn dominated him, winning 81 of them. Cotto won 14, 5 were draws. Nunn stopped Miguel Cotto 26 times. Cotto was able to score 8 knockouts out of his 14 wins. But see, I think that one is pretty easy. It's easy to see because, of course, we know Cotto's sort of a blown-up middleweight, and Nunn's great big guy, 6'3".
Right. Well, I thought
southpaw.
I thought Michael Nunn was. I have him at 6'1". Was he 6'3"?
Oh, 6'1". I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well. Miguel Cotto. What is he? 5'7"?
Yeah, he's a little guy.
Yeah.
He's little, and And what is he? 156. What was he against Martinez? I don't know. He's not a big middleweight. But these were the interesting ones. Against Golovkin, I had him fight Gennady Golovkin, of course, who's ranked number 2 or ranked And in the first bout, it was a unanimous draw. They dropped each other. Nunn was dropped in the 11th, and then he dropped Triple G in the 12th. I had them rematch, and Nunn won a second-round knockout. He lost a point in the first for a low blow, and he was stunned with a right hand by the end of the first. And then in the second round, he scored a one-punch KO, very much like the Columbine win. When they fought 100 times, Nunn won 70, Golovkin won 24, 6 were draws, 28 KOs scored by Michael Nunn. Out of Triple G's 24 wins, he was able to stop Michael Nunn 15 times. And finally, I did have him in against Andre Ward. This is the first fight Andre's had in some time. And Nunn won by DQ in the 5th round. Ward dropped Nunn in the 4th, and then Ward was disqualified for hitting low in the 5th round. I had them rematch, and Nunn won a unanimous decision. Then I had them fight 100 times, and these guys split pretty evenly. Nunn won 48, Ward won 43. There were 9 draws, and of the 43 wins, Ward knocked out Michael Nunn 14 times, and Michael Nunn knocked Ward out only 9 times.
That's I'm pretty surprised that he dominated Triple G like that.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at that too.
Well, he was second to none. He was. But Michael Nunn, he was a former world middleweight champion, super middleweight champion, he challenged for the world light heavyweight championship. Came up short. He had a career record, 58 wins, 37 coming by knockout. He had 4 losses in his career, in which he was only stopped at one time against James Toney. 415 rounds as a pro with a 60% knockout ratio. He is still in the slammer, and he's going to be 52 years old this year. Michael Nunn, this week's blast from the past, and I'm glad we did Michael Nunn, Alex. To be honest with you, I think that I think he deserves to be a blast from the past. Definitely, and I really enjoyed watching some of the clips of him, and I'll post them on all the social media because this, like you said, this is a good era for TV fights, and he does, as much as, there's some fighters' styles who just you can't watch. This guy's not like that. It is defensive, but and he's elusive, but it is a lot more watchable than I remembered. Great job as usual, Alex. This week's blast from the past, Michael second to none.